Allison?
Yes.
I was just thinking about this workshop. We won't need to make any kind of vote on the determination of essential function for this meeting, will we?
That's a good question, Mr. Chairman. I think that you're not conducting any business. You're not going to be deliberating. If it doesn't trouble you to have that, I think that what you are doing, though, is you are meeting by electronic participation, and you're doing that under the order, and that order does require such a determination. So just stepping through it like a lawyer, forgive me for doing that, but I think that you should. Yes, sir.
I agree. So I guess I'm stepping through it like the lawyer. Susan, are we ready?
I think we're ready.
All right. I'll go ahead and call the meeting, our workshop to order this evening. And I guess our first item of business for our workshop is the prayer. Commissioner Carriger, would you lead us in prayer this evening?
Be glad to, Mr. Chairman. If you would, please bow your head. Dear Heavenly Father, may we use our gifts and skills to your service. Help us to make good decisions for your people. Strengthen us. Give us the resolve to do right by your people. These things we ask in the name of your blessed Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Commissioner Carriger.
You're welcome.
Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
We do not have Kathy with us tonight, Chairman Matherly.
Susan, will you call the roll, please?
I'll be happy to. Steve Light, Kent Harris, Jerome Fitzgerald, Danny Edens,
Here.
Brian Davenport,
Here.
Greg Matherly,
Here.
Larry England, Freddie Malone,
Here.
Susie Williams, Phil Carriger,
Here.
Jody Jones,
Here.
Robbie Tester,
Here.
Gary McAllister,
Here.
Jim Wheeler,
Here.
and Mike Ford.
Thank you. Just to document who is with us this evening. For those of you that weren't here, I'd ask Allison whether it was a good idea for us to make a determination of essential function, since we are doing this workshop by electronic means. Allison, do you want to speak to that just a minute? While we may have missed someone that it was did not hear our conversation. You're muted.
Thank you. You as commissioners are participating in this meeting, and even though you're not conducting business per se, not deliberating issues, anytime that you do come together, it's a meeting.
Join the meeting.
And therefore, in order for you to conduct this meeting and with electronic participation under the governor's order, there is the requirement that you make a determination that it's an essential function of the county. And so for sake of good order, if you would just consider that this workshop for you to become more informed on the budget committee's work and provide them some insights as they've stated in the agenda, you're determining whether or not that's an essential function of the business and necessary to conducting the business of the county.
Thank you, Allison. We have a motion to that effect.
No move.
Motion made by
This is Jody.
Carriger, seconded by Commissioner Jones, to approve the essential agenda for the workshop. Susan, will you call the roll for us, please?
Absolutely. Commissioner Light, Commissioner Harris, Commissioner Harris,
He is muted.
Commissioner Harris?
Commissioner Harris, are you there?
I am. I'm here.
Okay. Commissioner Fitzgerald, Commissioner Edens,
Yes.
Commissioner Davenport,
Yes.
Commissioner Matherly,
Yes.
Commissioner England, Commissioner Malone,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Commissioner Carriger,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner Tester,
Yes.
Commissioner McAllister,
Yes.
Commissioner Wheeler,
Yes.
Commissioner Ford.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
We do have a quorum for our budget workshop. We really don't need a quorum, but it's always good to, we have so many participants. So thank you all for being here this evening. I will go ahead and turn it over to Mayor Grandy, and he will bring us some budget items. And
Brenda.
I know he's wanting to get to us.
Join the meeting.
Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, we just had somebody come in. Who was? Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of stuff to do and a lot of information, but thought we would just start. Mr. Carragher emailed a question in sort of just before the meeting, and let me just ask him because I think it sort of adds scope to the discussion as we go forward. So, Mr. Harris, would you mind sharing with us your question?
Did you say Harris? Carriger.
Carragher.
Yeah, I just sent in a note to Mitch and asked him to be sure and go over the basic assumptions that we would be using to put our budget together. And then the second thing was to see if we'd gotten any guidance from the state of Tennessee. And what I was looking for, any guidance with respect to the state budget, what do they anticipate this year? What do they anticipate next year? And then if they had any guidance or common issues, trends that they thought we should be aware of for the local budgets. And I come at that from a perspective as a banker. I found the national and the state bank examiners to be a good source of current information of what's going on in the industry. And that was kind of precipitated my question to Mitch and the mayor.
So thank you, Commissioner Carragher. With respect to direction from the comptroller, really the only thing we've gotten from them is the communication back in March, on the 20th of March, that indicated that they expected us to move forward with the budget process despite the distraction of the COVID pandemic and all the related stuff going on with that, and to complete it by the June 30th. So that was that. And they did suggest that pay particular attention to a couple of things. One is, the change in the environment with respect to what this pandemic has done, and to forecast conservatively, which is something we normally do anyway, and to be sure that we had funds available to cover our debt. So, unfortunately, to date, that is all the guidance that we have gotten out of the comptroller's office or from anyone in the state. I will say that over the last couple of days, there have been some pretty high-powered meetings in Nashville that we paid a little bit of attention to. Yesterday, the state funding board met and heard from a number of economists trying to ascertain the impact of the virus both on the state of Tennessee and on the at the federal level as well. Their data is somewhat tainted because typical benchmark information they use is not available. There's no current information available because the state pushed back the deadline for filing F&E information, for example, business tax and that sort of thing. So numbers that they typically would be relying on, they won't really see until, well, they'll be reported in June and probably won't be able to analyze them, for really sometime into July. So that was not particularly helpful, but the forecast range for the state having a shortfall, had a shortfall of in April, significant shortfall in April of 41%, and are projecting a shortfall at year end, potentially $500 million, and they're looking at the projection going into FY21 could creep up to as much as 1.5 revenue reduction over projection for this year. So the state folks are working hard. Governor's asked his departments, for example, to dig in and make an effort to reduce their expenses by 12%. We asked, you'll hear shortly that we asked our folks to try to find 5%. We were having a tough time, getting our expenses and revenues to balance. So I'm not sure that answers all the questions, but the state folks there was a state finance administration meeting today. Butch Healy from the comptroller's office and David Thurman, budget analyst from the comptroller, spent a couple hours sharing information with Senate Finance, and they all have a lot of work to do as well, as we do. So having said that, Mitch, why don't you get us started? We're going to start with some high-level stuff and then, dig in, and we'll go wherever this group would like to go with respect to detail after that. Mitch?
Get it going. Okay. Well, good to have all of y'all on board tonight. I hope you've reached out to your partners at home and made sure that they have plenty of substance coming your way. As hopefully this could be, or hopefully not, that this will not be a really long meeting, but we do have a lot to cover, so it could, you might want to call out for pizza. What I want to, as the mayor alluded to, I want to just touch on, some of the high level pieces. What's happening here? I'm losing love technology. We lost a little bit of data on that slide. Let's see where the rest of them go. Combined expenditures for the county as a whole, and this is 2019, these were actual numbers. As you can see on the slides, 156 million. Now that includes the school when we say the county as a whole. And you can see where this slide's projecting how we actually spend those dollars. Almost half of it goes to education. 25% of it goes to general government, which out of that $40 million general government budget, approximately $20 million of it is for the sheriff and the jail. So as I've said on numerous occasions, we spend anywhere from 67 to 75% on incarceration and education. So as a community, so the better we do in one, the less in the larger one, the less we should have to do in the second one. Moving on, and so how do we actually end up spending those dollars in what different areas? This slide's probably a little misleading in that it's presenting the salaries and benefits, and that I wanted y'all to see what portion of that was. But if you add those two pie pieces together, you're looking at 35%. But keep in mind, we're comparing that total to $13 million or 16% for debt service, and then the rest of capital outlay. if you remove capital outlay and debt service, then that's what it looks like. We're right at 60%, 41% in salaries and 19% in benefits. So there's not a lot of wiggle room in our expenditure budgets because we're so heavily dependent on people. This next slide really just shows a little bit of how those numbers have stacked up over the last 3 years. FY19 compared to our FY20 budget, and then compared to FY21. The green being FY21, and FY20 is kind of the orange. And as you can see, debt service is pretty level. But of course our numbers are moving in the green primarily on the salary and benefits side. This slide I picked up at a government finance officer's WebEx that I participated in, and I shared it with the budget committee, but wanted to share it with the rest of the commission because it kind of gives you a broad overview of what recessions and what this current COVID-19 pandemic may actually do to us. In the yellow bars, we've overlaid the prior recessions and pandemics. The blue line represents our property tax revenue from 2000 to 2019. You'll see a few little steep inclines in there, and you'll see those on some other graphs as well. And what those are, like here and down here, those are reappraisals. It's not, we're not seeing a huge amount of growth now just because that's where the reappraisal ended up. But point being is that our property tax revenue line is fairly consistent. Even during these so-called recessionary times. And I think that goes back probably to Economics 101, is that property taxes are fairly inelastic. I wouldn't want to be in, necessarily the state's position or the city's position because they rely so much on sales tax. And our schools are going to be impacted by that. We've got our the school finance director and the board, are really got their fingers crossed and they're holding their breath that sales tax holds true, because that would be a major impact if we saw significant reductions there. And I'll send everyone, a copy of this slide deck when we're finished. I'll just email it to the commission. This screen represents what our real property assessed valuations are from 1995 coming forward to 2019. And again, the major spikes are our reappraisal years. But what I found interesting when I laid this out is how in 1999 to essentially the start of the Great Recession, we had a trajectory of something like this, okay? Well, after the Great Recession and where we are today, here we go. We're in a much flatter growth mode, and you've heard me, expound about limited growth, and that's. I mean, I think the numbers show that. Point that out. We're not. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not what we were all used to in the height of some of our careers when the economy was booming. This next slide actually takes out, it represents the assessed valuations, but I removed the years that actually had reappraisals in it and dropped in the year-over-year percentage change. And so you can see, up until the Great Recession, we were, we are moving at, 2, 3, 4% growth rates. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Subsequent to 2008, where are we? We're, 1, sub 1, maybe 1.7. So, that plays into what we are able to do and what we need to do as a county to provide the services that we need to provide. This slide, I understand this made it to into a news feed or something, but this presents our single family building permits from 2005 to 2019. Of course, you can see that they really fell off. We had a pretty good kick up back in 17. And then it looks like we may be plateauing. It'll be interesting to see where Scott ends up at the end of 2020.
Hey, Mitch.
Yep.
On that slide, there's one thing that is permit numbers, not permit values. So
correct.
And if you looked at that graph with permit values, it would be on a slightly increasing trend by roughly 10% over the last 3 years. So, that's really probably more important than the number of permits, but just want to throw that in. So it's a little bit better than what it appears here. Not great, but a little bit better.
And let me make another observation. Ran this calculation a little earlier. We do see subdivisions coming online, and we do see this growth occurring. But if you do the math, and if you have $10 million of new residential property come on the rolls, at our current tax rate of $2.15, that $10 million worth of property will equate to $53,000 in property tax. Okay. If you break it down to the penny level, which is what we're used to looking at, it translates into $250 per penny. So, mentally, $10 million worth of residential growth adds $250 to our penny. Our penny right now is $325,300. So, point being, it takes a lot of residential growth to make significant changes in the property tax revenue structure. This slide for all the commissioners and essentially shows, I'm losing it's losing some of the text. This is unincorporated Washington County. Watauga is a little sliver in here that you can't even see. The gray is Jonesboro, and then the other 60% or so is inside the municipal limits of Johnson City. And this does reflect both commercial and residential. And I didn't do this, but Scott Buckingham could probably, give us a really good show on it. But if you carved out the commercial property, you're probably going to find it more like half and half county and city in terms of residential land values. Okay, so I've been talking about property values because that's what we drive our county government on. This is our projection for FY21. Okay, we have because of the pandemic and because of the impact that we think it may have on some individuals and businesses, we've ramped the collection percentage down slightly from 96 to 95. You'll recall that for many years we budgeted at a 94% collection rate. A couple of years ago, we raised that, I believe, to 90, maybe 3 years ago, raised that to a 96% collection rate. Mayor, I believe you've got some information from the trustee as to where we are today on our collections. And
we're just actually slightly ahead of where we were at the end of May last year at just a little under 95.5. So we didn't get to 96 last year before the end of June, but we did get that early in July. So we're on track to be about the same as we were last year. But again, next year is going to be a tougher year on everybody, we think.
One other thing I want to point out there, in this slide, you'll notice it shows actual penny for 2020 for this, for this year, an actual penny, and this is fiscal year, so it's a 2019 tax year. The actual penny's $325,000. We created the budget in June. We started the process, of course, back in February. When we budgeted, and the budget we adopted in June had a penny equivalent equal to $328,000 per penny. So we had $3,000 more expected in a penny than what Rick eventually billed. And the reason for that is that once everybody got their tax bills in October and some other adjustments that were made, there was actually a decrease in the assessed values that Rick could bill for, which brought that penny down to $325. So, essentially out of the chute, we were somewhat behind the curve. We will not meet our property tax budget this year, even if we collect the full 96%. So just FYI, but what we're looking at now is going from, so we have we've actually got, because we're rolling that 1% out of the collection, we've actually got a slight decrease in the penny. You can see where we've allocated based on our current tax rates, which are 67 pennies for the general fund. You can see them here for the $2.15. You can see where they're all allocated, and of course, 24 million will be split between Johnson City and the Washington County school system based on their ADA percentages, their average daily attendance. Now, all right. So big picture, where are we going to be at the end of 21? That's what this schedule shows you here. First column is our where we're projecting our fund balances to be at the end of June of 2020. The general fund, we're expecting it to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 16.7 million. As you'll see from the budgets that we have in hand, we've got 40 million of projected revenue and $42.7 million of projected expense to net us a $2.6 million deficit. That will put us, if you jump all the way out to the right-hand side, that will put us about $2.2 million below our fund balance policy. And our fund balance policy represents 4 months of operating expenses is what we're required to keep in fund balance. And if you think about it, we bill for property taxes the 1st of October. We start collecting a little bit in October, but November and December is when cash flow starts in. So we've got to have dollars to support us from July until November. So therein is the rationale and the reason for maintaining a 4-month fund balance policy. All right. Mayor, do we want to jump into the general fund, or did we want to talk about something else first?
I think unless the commission would like to move in some different direction, the general fund probably ought to be our target. Commissioners, do you have any? You've seen the funds there that we will ultimately ask to be approved. Are there any of those that you would like to look at before we hit the general fund?
And I will add that there's 2 that aren't on here. That's the school general purpose school fund and the cafeteria fund that the full commission will have to approve. And I think that Director Hale and Dr. Flannery were maybe on the call. So if we're not going to delve into the school stuff, they may want to go do something more exciting.
What could be more exciting? So the schools have not made a request to the county for any additional funding. They are requesting the county to commission to approve use of some of their fund balance, but nothing that they've asked for so far will impact any of the general fund dollars. So is there some other place that commissioners would like to go other than the general fund?
Chairman, this is Commissioner Harris. I've got a question along these lines we've been talking about.
Sure, go ahead.
Is it okay, Chairman, to ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Harris.
Well, I'd sent a question today. I guess, we're telling everybody to cut, and I've read, I guess, all the emails that I've been sent by our director Meredith and Sherry Green, and then I've seen where our tax assessor last night on Channel 11 News had said we were above in projections for building compared to this time last year. So I guess I sent that question in today to Commissioner or to Director Meredith. But when are we actually collecting above what we were last year or not? Because I'm sort of seeing it both ways in what I'm receiving. I've seen that, and then I got the memo from her that we're in sort of dire projections for losing revenue. So that's one question I have on the revenue side.
All right. Mitch, could you go ahead and answer that question for Commissioner Harris? I know we're all interested in that.
Yeah, we are not collecting more property tax than we collected last year. I mean, nothing substantially more.
So while property tax makes up the majority of our revenue, there are other components as well. That might, Mitch, that might just lead us into this general fund discussion, because the very first part of that is revenue, and so we may be able to just cover it easier looking at it.
Okay. Will do. All right. So as we move into our general fund, and some of this is just going to be background information, but where our budget currently is for 2021 is a total of $40.1 million and this is just in the general fund. Property tax.
Harris.
Join the meeting.
Current property taxes are budgeted to be at almost a little south of 22 million, or will be 54% of our total general fund revenue. Of course, the county officials receive collect commissions off of all their various services that they perform. They, based on our method of operation, they remit those fees back to us, and we pay all their salaries, or you do. So that's the amount we're expecting to come from them. We projected a slight decrease in that, not substantial, but we are thinking that will probably be depressed a little this next year. Property taxes, I already alluded to, the fact that we will have a lower collection percentage, but essentially for all practical purposes, property tax revenue is going to be flat in 2021. State of Tennessee funds, basically the bulk of that is our health department grant and our prisoner board for the jail makes up the bulk of that. And then the federal government that rolls into the county general fund is predominantly the federal prisoner board. Not all of it, but the majority of it. And then, so where are we spending the dollars? And again, if you remember the slide when we looked at the total spend across the county for education and everything, I indicated that general government was about 25% of that number. Well, this is at 25%. And, as you can see, public safety, and that includes, our EMS, our 911, fire, the sheriff's operations, but we're spending $22 million on public safety. Public health and welfare, of course, is predominantly the health department. Finance includes, the purchasing, the register of deeds in there. There are 4 or 5 different departments that are in finance, includes accounts and budget. Administration of justice, of course, is the courts, and then general government is the mayor, the commission, those things that don't follow the trustee's office, and those items. We put $500,000 into agricultural services. And this is what our spend looks like out of the general fund over the last 5 years or 4 years. You have the 2019 budget column here. These numbers are actual, 15, 16, 17, and 18. So you can see we were fairly flat coming through here. Then we ramped up a bit in 2019. Our budget took us up a little higher in 2020. And then the request, and I just put this on here for information purposes, this is what the departments had actually requested that they felt needed. So you can see where that bumped up. And then after the mayor's efforts, in the budget committee's efforts to ask the departments to go back and look at their numbers, you can see we've had a little bit of a decrease. We're slightly ahead of our FY20 budget. So what all's transpiring and going FY20 to FY21? Well, let's look at this in 2 pieces. Let's look at it on the revenue side, and let's look at it on the expense side. Screen that you have in front of you now represents our revenue budget for FY21, or excuse me, FY20. The budget was 41.7 million, almost 41.8. What we've done is we've taken out items that are one-time revenue items. You'll recall that you approved the transfer of almost $1 million, 900,000 from debt service into the general fund in order to not run into a fund balance problem, to offset the deficit that the FY20 budget had built into it. We lost we haven't received a special prosecutor grant. This 71,000 is offset by an expense down below, but it does reconcile revenues. Had a small amount of library grants that haven't been renewed yet. The offsetting expense has been deducted.
I can always drive, Jack.
Got the ECD grant that was completed last year that we won't be receiving in FY21. And of course, the expenses related to those grants are also gone over on the expense side. And as I mentioned, actually, I said it's going to be flat. Actually, our property tax number, we're going to be down about 222,000 from last year's budget. So, that goes to the impact of the penny that I was talking about earlier. We've got, we're projecting some other local taxes, specifically, let me grab my schedule. Yeah, we're looking at other taxes, a little bit, some slight reductions in some local utility tax, a reduction somewhat in some of our litigation taxes, and things that we collect, that the courts collect, on which there's a tax built into them. And so we see those things as dropping. I think we maybe used a 4 or 5% reduction, may have been 3%. In those tax rates, which would reduce about 137,000. We had 2 tax sales this year. We had 2 years in the tax sale that we just completed. So this next year, we're going to expect that to be about half of what she did in the current year. We do expect, going back to the slide on the residential building permits, if those numbers do continue to ramp up, and if the last the 4 months of this year, which weren't on that previous slide, if those things continue to move up, then we've looked at a little bit of an increase in permits. Our cost that our reappraisal cost, our billing to Johnson City will probably drop a little bit because this is not a reappraisal year. That's driven by actually what the assessor's cost to do the reappraisals are. And since we're not doing a full reappraisal, we're utilizing Mr. Buckingham's budget numbers to calculate what our billing would be to Johnson City and Jonesboro, because we provide tax services or reappraisal services for them every year. And that's a $33,000 decrease. Sheriff's Office, Chief Lightning is looking at a little bit of a reduction in federal prisoner board, but that'll hopefully be offset by some increases in reimbursement for state prisoner medical. We're looking at a little bit of an increase in the telecommunication revenue. You can see the rest of them in there. Hall income tax, which in 2019 was for the general fund, that thing's going to go away. As you know, the Hall income tax has been completely phased out. So we won't see any of that after next year. We've got a little bit of increase in the health department, and then hopefully Rick can Rick can continue to maintain his good work down in the trustee's office and increasing our interest income. And as I mentioned, we're looking at a little bit of a decrease in, I think it was about $6 million of fees that we bring back into the county general fund from the officials. So we were looking, we've estimated about a $300,000 reduction there. So that gets us down to a $40.1 million revenue budget. Any questions before we leave that and move to the expenditure side of the general fund?
This is Jody. I have a question.
Okay. Jody?
Somebody, is it okay?
Yes, you go ahead, Jody.
I need a little slow person's help on the property tax change, the 222,330. Can you explain that to me again? Like why it's lower?
Because what we're doing is we're comparing budget number to budget number. Okay, we're not comparing an actual collection to a budgeted collection. We're looking at what we budgeted last year. And as I alluded to, our budget was overstated because we thought we were going to get $328,000 per penny, but we're only going to get $325,000 per penny.
Oh, and this was because of the number of people who contested whether their reassessed value was appropriate.
It could be a mixture of things. We took the assessed values that the assessor had in May, and that's what we used to calculate the budget on. He had a different set of assessed numbers when Rick Story sent his bills out at the 1st of October. Those folks, then there were some adjustments and corrections that the trustee makes at the direction of the assessor. If there were errors, I had a piece of property one time, somebody built a dock on it, and somehow I got my tax bill, and now I've got a $30,000 dock sitting on a piece of property that I own. It's not my dock, but I'm getting ready to pay tax on it. And I don't know that until, I get my tax bill. So those changes occurred, before the payment was made before February 28th. So we'll see. I don't. That'd be probably a good question to ask is what kind of adjustments have we made since the tax billing. But but that's what drives that property tax decline, Commissioner Jones. Okay.
One other little piece probably that's a factor in there is that we reevaluated our tax rate from 238 down to 215. The actual amount was 215.04, but after, as Commissioner Jones pointed out, after the Board of Equalization finished their work and readjusted some of those property values, the adjusted penny should have been 215.49. So we effectively lost a half a cent, in that reappraisal effort when we were only thinking we were going to lose 0.4%. So that's another little component of that.
Anybody else have any questions on the revenue side?
Just a comment. We had Dr. John Smith come talk to us a year ago, and I'm looking at this from 30,000 feet. The problem is that Northeast Tennessee, we're just not growing in people. And with inflation running 1.5% to 2% annually, that's our problem. Our expenses, the cost of doing business is going up quicker than we're growing. And that, to me, that's the big issue we've got. And that's the number one problem we've got to find a solution to.
Mr. Carragher, you're exactly right, and that has been the case as we've emerged from that depression that ended around 2011. We have underperformed surrounding regions by a significant amount. We talked about all that before, but the result of that is that growth in revenue curve that you saw earlier at some years 0.4%, 0.7%, certainly less than 1, where, as you pointed out, inflation has been somewhere between 1 and 2 each of those years. So, ultimately, eventually that just catches up.
And I think that's what we're seeing right now. It's caught up with us, and our focus really needs to be on how can we grow the county, and that needs to be what we talk about and think about is ways to encourage growth, the way to encourage entrepreneurship. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Mitch, can we go back to Commissioner Harris's question a minute ago? His phone went dead and he didn't get to hear the answer. So while we're talking about revenue.
Can we go back to what his question was?
Yeah, it was about the Commissioner Harris, you're with us.
Steve Light.
Join the meeting.
Commissioner Harris, are you with us? His question was that about the where JHL reported last night about the projected that property values were going up, and how did that affect us?
Chairman, can you hear me now? This is Commissioner Harris.
Yes, can you repeat your question, Commissioner, to Mitch?
Yeah, I asked the question, and my phone, for some reason, I got cut off. I had to call back in, but I've been listening, and I heard what he said. We're $222,000 down, he said, from last year's budget on the property taxes. But I just wonder, is there any communications between officials? Because when taxpayers watched the news last night, and I watched it. Our tax assessor said that we were growing higher than we were last year. When people hear that, and then we're asking our other officials to cut their budget, and then we're in dire straits. I mean, we're sending mixed signals. So I don't know what the mixed communication is, but if he's saying that we're collecting, more than we were last year as far as growth, why are we seeing a decrease? It just don't make sense to me.
What Commissioner Harris, what Mr. Buckingham may be referring to is we're not collecting more tax revenue now than we were last year. In fact, we're probably going to be less than FY21. You've got to remember that when the assessor's looking at stuff, it takes almost 2 years before that to turn into cash to the county. I mean, if he's aware of a subdivision that gets subdivided right now, then that's not going to hit our coffers in terms of property tax revenue in all likelihood until 2022, because the values are as of January 1 of 2020, and so you've got a fairly significant lag in the time that dollars are placed into real property infrastructure and development, and before you convert those to tax dollars. $2,000 or $3,000 per penny. For every $10 million of residential real estate that goes on to the county's books, the county's rolls, that generates $250 of tax. For 1 penny will increase by $250 on $10 million worth of residential real estate. Takes a lot to make any significant difference. And I
would like to ask you this then, is there any communications between the mayor's office and the tax assessor's office when taxpayers see on Channel 11 News that we're collecting more and there's more value, and then we hear that there's not? Well, it sends a bad message. We have to answer for that, and then you have discrepancy. I mean, it makes us think, what's going on?
I'd like to add to that. The story last night said there was 800,000 more this year in permits than last year. Now, that was the reporter saying that, and they didn't distinguish whether that was residential or residential and commercial. And Mr. Buckingham did say that that would be prorated this year, which is where the effect I think you're talking about, Mr. Meredith. It won't show up in full for sure for 2 years, but that was not made clear at all. And I share the same concern that Commissioner Harris is voicing as far as the message, because I talked to a couple people today that had seen that last night, and they were surprised to hear, that we were wrestling with this budget, because it did give the appearance that, these are people that aren't dealing with the county on a day-to-day basis. Nobody on this commission would have been surprised by that. But just general public, they saw that story last night, and it came off like, the county's in great shape. And we're in good shape, but we've got a real problem to wrestle with here. And we do need to get on message. I would agree with that. I don't think anybody, was necessarily even wrong, but the message was wrong that came out from it.
Hitch, if I could make a point or ask a question, 800,000 in building permits, that may not be all new construction. It may be somebody putting a new roof on their house. it may be somebody adding a new room to their house. Would that not make a difference in property tax collected?
It would, but when Commissioner Wheeler, and I haven't seen the news report, but I mean, you need to keep some of this in perspective. Okay, if we've got $800,000 in permits, that's at fair market value. Take that down to an assessed value of 40% or 25%. Now you're talking about $200,000. Okay, well, if $10 million gives us $250 on the penny, how much does 200,000 give us? I mean, and I hear you about the message, and I get that, but I'm dealing with the numbers and what you all have to contend with in terms of funding the county. And so, it may be slightly different, but yeah, we have a challenging revenue picture in front of us, regardless of what Channel 11 says.
Well, and even when one of our elected officials does not appear to necessarily understand what that message is, that concerns me about when we've asked them to make these cuts and some of them haven't been able to make it. Do they really understand the picture? I think our communication is important to the public, absolutely, but it's also important internally.
Well, maybe after the next hour or so, there'll be some more folks that have a better understanding of where we are and where this ship's headed. Anybody else?
I'll just say one quick thing, which is that I attended this workshop in Gatlinburg that the state organization put on last fall. And it was on a communication strategy with like a one-page flyer that you can hand out in your community that's all full of infographics. They recommended doing it once a year, maybe around budget time, that has real simple sort of explanations for kind of like some of your nice pie charts and easy ways of explaining sort of how money is coming in and going out, and real basic descriptions of how the county is functioning. And we have Susan on board to do some of that for us. So we ought to think about something like that. What I heard was that other counties have experimented with putting those flyers around, publishing them in the newspaper, and even making them into something that could be shared on social media or, on our website, et cetera. So we really ought to think about creative ways to make the information very digestible and some of the key points accessible to the public. I think that these are all really good points.
It's on her to-do list. She and I have talked about that. I think that'd be a great idea. Anybody else? Okay.
Hey, Mitch, if I may, I don't want it to go unnoticed. I have quickly seen the report on WJHL, and it is a positive message. I think it is easy for it to be confused, but thankfully building permits are up, which is a positive, when it would be far worse if they were down. But yeah, I did the calculation, and I mean, an 800,000 increase in the value of building permits 1 year over the other, that's a positive. But in terms of actual revenue increase to the county, rough math says it's about $4,000. And so that's a positive. But then one of the things that we have impacting the budget this year is that each penny is worth less than what we had budgeted last year. And we are being conservative in light of the pandemic and estimating that we're going to collect slightly less of the taxes than we have in recent years. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on revenue? If not, we'll jump on to the expenditure side. This next slide, again, just as we did with the revenues, This is doing it over on the expenditure side of the ledger. Our FY20 budget was $42.8 million. Those things that were one-time expenditures, and we've gone through and vetted and pulled these out. That for example, Scott had in between July of 2019 and June of 2020, we'll have 2 equalization boards. If you'll recall, he had to move over. He had to have 2 months worth last year to take care of all the appeals for the equalization. So that's why we're losing. He'll still have a board that begins, I think they actually start, June 1st, Mayor? And
June 1st, right?
I guess a public service announcement here. They'll be at the, up on the highway, the election office.
Well, yes, sir.
Okay. But they'll only have 1 board meeting this month. So that we had 2 budgeted last year. We only have 1 month budgeted this year. So we pulled $5,700 out as one-time money. I'm not, the archives renovation project, that was actually revenue that we booked to keep Ned's, to be able to offset Ned Irwin's expenses. He is a revenue neutral operation. Well, he's revenue neutral to the general fund in that all the archive fees that we collect over in the courts or down in Kathy's office, those things are earmarked for the operation of the archives, and for the most part more than pays for his staff and his salaries and occupancy, and is actually paid to renovate the jail storage here that he has at the jail annex behind the historic courthouse. Let's see if there's anything else in there that jumps out. Library grants. Yeah, so you can see where those numbers kind of flow. That last item was, if you'll recall, we made an amendment during the year to increase minimum pay among all the employees, and we had budgeted right at $34,000. So that number essentially came out. The reason why it comes out is because we never spread that across any of the other budget line items. Those numbers were already in the operational budgets of those few departments that needed that pay increase. So not moving it just kept from creating surpluses or funds spent on things that weren't approved. Now the change, so those were all the one-time expenditures that we had out of the general fund. This next section is the things that we have built into the FY21 budget. Top of the list was a 2% salary increase, and that's essentially for all the general fund employees, which includes benefits. We do project that we will need to make some adjustment to employee insurance because it seems like we have a few more people moving from single to a family, or folks coming on board that want family coverage. So we've seen a little bit of upward pressure on our employee insurance numbers. The employee insurance fund is doing okay, but we are seeing a little bit of increase in costs that the general fund and actually, the general fund's having to bear. The officials all have a statutory salary increase of 38. We've got some personnel adjustments in the county attorney's office, coupled with a reduction in contracted legal. And I'm sorry, it looks like it cut off part of the verbiage there. We'll be picking up a full year of rent on the election commission office. And we will also have an additional election in FY21 that'll make it 3. And that's actually increased the election expenses by $154,000. I will tell you at this point, Ms. Stewart called me yesterday and she had reduced her postage account, her postage spend, in response to the budget committee's request to reduce departmental budgets by 5%. She called yesterday and said that there was she's going to have $10,000 more of postage. That's going to run that number back up to about $164,000. Register of Deeds, some reductions. We have eliminated the code's reduction in environmental cleanup is a negative $35,000. We've taken out all the cleanup costs. There is no actual contracted cleanup cost for your sites that may need cleaning. We do have the cost of Mr. France and legal services built into the budget to handle that, but nothing budgeted for the actual cleanup. We've got a little bit of increase in maintenance agreements and repairs. Tax relief continues to go up a little bit. That's where tax relief, of course, is where the trustee, where somebody applies for tax relief in the first year, the county has to reimburse the trustee for the reduction, if you will, of those taxes. So that adds to our tax relief number. We're expecting that to be a little higher in next year. Archive is looking for some part-time personnel to increase their part-time personnel so they can take some vacations. Again, I'd submit to you that item is really budget neutral because whatever Ned doesn't spend from his archive fee goes into a reserve that can only be spent for the archive. So, that's where I would leave that. We've had a little bit of a reduction on the over in accounts and budgets. We budgeted some accounting support in prior years from our former CPAs. We've eliminated really all of that. Trustee, Mr. Story reduced his numbers. I've got a schedule a little later that'll actually show line item by line item or department by department what kind of reductions we got from the different officials and department heads at our 5% request reduction. The list goes on, and most of these actually, one of the things you ought to look at, we're at $42.8 million. $42.8 million was last year's budget. And once we pull out all the one-time and the current year changes, jump to the bottom, we're actually budgeting less money this year than we budgeted last year. Okay, we're down to 42.7 million. So, that's a pot. We've decreased it by 100,000 or so. Is that right? Make sure. Yep. So it's not, it is a challenge because our revenues at 42.7 are still more than our expenditures at 42.7 are still more than our revenues. So, we still have a mismatch, but we have been able to reduce those expenditures, so that they're really essentially almost flat, a slight decrease from last year. Any questions on any of that before I jump off of some of these changes? And I'm sure after you've looked at, some of the detail, you may have more questions about particular numbers and lines and increases and decreases. And, we'll talk about those, but, from a 30,000 foot level, moving $4,000 here doesn't do a whole lot. If you do that a bunch of times, it does, but, just once or twice doesn't do a lot for you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So is it fair to say that the deficit we're seeing is something we would have anticipated based on our kind of known lack of economic growth and really doesn't have much to do at all with the pandemic hitting in the last quarter of the year?
That is exactly right. Okay. Our fiscal, the pandemic's going to impact us, but
next year.
Yes.
Yeah. And is it true that the state did allocate some extra funds and like did I imagine that maybe it was like $500,000? Like what happened with some of that funding? And yeah.
The mayor, do you want to address that or?
Sure. The in the original budget that the governor talked about in January and February, there was an allocation of $50 million for cities and counties. Our share of that would have been somewhere around $750,000. And then when the pandemic appeared, he doubled that. So that is essentially available starting in January the 1st on a grant basis. So you have to figure out a use for it, apply for it. It's one-time funding, and so not to be confused with all of these, revenues and expenses that are predominantly reoccurring. So that is out there today. After listening to the Senate Finance Committee hearing today, I think the legislature shows back up in Nashville next Monday for some period of time, potentially 2 weeks, or they don't really know at this point. And I think the word from that committee meeting was everything's on the table. So that may or may not stay with us. You may also recall that the CARES Act provided funding to the state, some of which was destined for local government because of the pandemic. And the state share of that, well, in total was over $5 billion, but the COVID-19 related funding was somewhere around $2.36 billion. They talked about it, but don't yet have plans as to how they're going to disperse it. So you are correct. There was some promised money, but the governor has asked, I may have mentioned this earlier, the departments at the state level to reduce their expenditure budgets by 12%. They're talking about all sorts of things to try to cover a potential $1.5 billion deficit next year. And so I think our expectations of money coming from the state may be limited, but certainly whatever comes is going to be one-time funding and not something that you would be considering to plug any budget holes for recurring expenses.
And the 11% of our income that we get from the state, do we have any concerns about that being reduced for this coming fiscal year as other state-funded institutions are expecting and planning for?
Well, that's a good question. As you saw earlier, probably general government, the majority of our state revenue is around prisoner board, funding, that sort of thing. It would surprise me if they go to that level. There'd be a mutiny across the state for sure, but nothing's off the table, so we don't really know. But I would say at this point that that's going to be okay.
I have a question.
Back on just a little bit. The other piece of funding that comes from the state, of course, is our health department, but I don't suspect that'll be impacted. But what I think as a commission that you do need to at least keep in the back of your mind somewhere is what impact does that have on your school system? If you have the fiscal responsibility for funding that school system, if state revenues fall away, okay, that has to get made up. I mean, the schools obviously are going to need that made up from somewhere else. You don't have to make that up. I mean, if the state removes their funding, if they reduce the BEP or if they reduce BEP, you don't have to make that up. If sales tax goes down, there's a thing called maintenance of effort, and you do have to fill that gap at some point. So, just keep, as this evolves, and hopefully it will be short-lived in a V or a Nike swoosh, as somebody called it, in a fairly quick recovery. We won't have to worry about some of these theoreticals, but just wanted to let you know that.
Well, I have heard that we're not to expect a V-shaped recovery, with the exception of one article that I read in The Economist just the other day. But otherwise, like, everything I'm reading is that the recovery is expected to be quite slow. Sorry for all whose hearts I'm breaking by saying this, but I do wonder, I'm watching people's faces. I do wonder, is the strategy for now just truly looking at, kind of keeping ourselves balanced for a year and not really kind of getting too concerned about a longer term strategy, knowing that, next year could be, a combination of the lack of economic growth and all this other stuff coming up on us.
Oh, I would say to that just to Commissioner Carragher's point earlier, some of this is not new. I mean, our recovery out of the Depression ending in 2011 is very flat, and so what you're seeing with this, and there's the recovery period. Interesting when you look at the history. It's the longest continual recovery in the last 100 years or so in modern history, and so there was an expectation from economists that something would happen to trigger us out of the recovery. We just had never really participated at a great level, in the recovery. We have just barely creeped along, well below our peer markets in the surrounding community. So what this has done is put us into, a significant decline initially. And as you pointed out, I'm reading probably the same information. There's nobody that I'm reading says that we're going to have a V-type recovery that brings us out as fast as we went in, and that we're more likely to be 5 years or so just getting back to the point where we were before this happened. So, in short answer to your, maybe long answer to your question, I don't think we should contemplate a 1-year solution. Personally.
Any other questions on the expenditure side?
I have a question, Mr. Meredith.
Yes, sir, Mr. Edens.
Can we go back to the reduction of environmental cleanup cases?
Yeah, that was 36. 30, yep.
What does that leave us as far as funding environmental cleanups?
Right now you have zero.
So that particular number is the actual hard amount that we would pay for someone to go clean up a site. Funding exists for Bobby France and for some staff help to help him do his work. He would point out to you that he probably solves 60 to 70% of the cleanup request cases without a court order and without any hard costs and expenses. But the hard number for what we had in the budget, I think last year, was $36,000 for actual cleanups. And probability of having some cleanup during the year that requires some funding is likely if we just go back in our modern history, because it may be a meth lab or some other health hazard that really we do have a responsibility to deal with. But yeah, the commission. I mean, as it is right now, there's zero money in there.
Well, we have currently cleanup cases that we haven't addressed for some time that were already before the Hugh committee. I thought we were working and moving towards a means of getting that settled. And I thought my assumption was that we were looking at a different way to do it, not a way of not to do it at all. I still get phone calls from different folks. I have one particular case in my area that I feel is a hazard to the children in the area. It's a burnout house, and I know we have others. And I also have concerns about the office moving forward. I'm just trying to understand, are we not going to do court cleanup cases any longer?
It's Commissioner Edens, the operations is fully funded. It's just the actual cleanup portion that we have not that this commission has not put any money into yet.
Well, and I'm just saying this is the first cut, so
I'm concerned.
There's plenty of opportunity to change this.
But are we saying we won't be doing environmental court cleanups any longer with no money there?
There's no revenue in the line that would actually pay for someone to go clean up a site.
But that's what we reduced, right? That's what we took away. There was revenue there, and this budget takes it out, correct?
At this point, there's no money in there for it, correct?
But it's because we're pulling it out of this budget, correct?
Well, we're just developing the budget.
We don't have a revenue source for environmental cleanup.
I don't think you're answering my question. My question is, if there's no money in the line item, we can't do any environmental cleanups. So is it our intent to not do environmental cleanups moving forward?
Is it not true that most of the environmental cleanups that we've approved the last year or two, we've had to pull money out of the general fund anyway because we were way over the budget? So
yeah, they were
absolutely.
They were not actually budgeted. They were coming from the general fund, which is what could happen in the future, I suppose.
And additionally, there are other ways to, as we've talked about before, other ways to go about tackling those few that have to be done that way to try not to have the county have to take it out of the budget. So there's multiple ways to deal with this, including the way we've been doing it, which is budget them and send it through budget committee and the commission to pull it out of general fund.
Yeah, well, actually this year to date, we have not overspent in the line that was originally budgeted, but we're pretty close. And of course, as you know, there's $50,000 worth of potential cases out there that we could go address. And if that money was approved for cleanup, then we would have overspent in this current fiscal year.
Okay, so and moving forward,
Mr. Chairman, could I ask a question? This is Commissioner Harris.
Go ahead, Commissioner Harris. I don't know where our chairman is.
He's here. I just had to get my mic on.
All right.
Go ahead, Commissioner Harris.
Okay, Chairman. Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Edens. I mean, I see his approach on this, and a lot of commissioners don't live, like I've said before, down in the county, and that office, which is run by Mr. France, I think they do a fine job because they keep a lot of these bad sites cleaned up, and it concerns me that we're not putting any money in his budget to do cleanup, because when you clean up a bad spot, you're improving other property around it, which should make the property value go up on it, plus the property you're cleaning up, the property value should go up. And I think his job is a plus for our county, and I don't understand why we're cutting that budget completely out. I know a lot of commissioners live in the city, and Johnson City has an aggressive approach to cleanups. And I guess this wouldn't touch anybody unless they actually live next to a place that had to deal with a mess. And I've seen several that he's helped to straighten out that were a mess.
Commissioner Harris and Commissioner Edens, I will, echo what, Commissioner Malone said earlier. Last year, I mean, we went into the year with nothing budgeted for cleanups. You all budgeted them on a case by case basis out of the general fund balance. So we just put the budget in essence back to where it was originally in FY20.
And this is Jody Jones. If I understand correctly, and maybe you need to correct me if I'm wrong on this, the adjustments within, so we had quite a few meetings about environmental court cleanup and trying to make that process work better. And one of the things we all agreed was that we needed to fund more and support more of Mr. Franz's work on the front end. And one of the things that we thought would help him was a little bit of support staff. And if I remember correctly, maybe some of that line item that's county attorney personnel is like an extra paralegal or somebody like that would be split between Ms. Wilkinson's office and support Mr. Franz. So in effect, what you have here is actually more support for environmental court cleanup than maybe what we had in our budget last year. Is that true?
I would say yes, it is in terms of support, but as Commissioner Harris's point and Commissioner Eden's point, there are cases that require actual cash to go do the cleanup, and that's where on each individual case, if we leave the budget the way it is, or it's being presented, or where we are at this point, we would need to go to fund balance every time to get revenue to deal with those cases. So at this point, I mean, someone would like to make a suggestion as to how much money we would like to allocate on the front end for environmental cleanup, actual work that Bobby gets approved through the court. Throw out a number and we'll put it in there and move on.
We did not allocate money last year. We just pulled it out of the general fund on a case-by-case basis.
That's correct.
Yep.
And I would also suggest that it might be more appropriate to go all the way through this budget before we start adding stuff back in, because as and I think most of you've probably watched or been a part of the budget committee meetings, but we're looking at needing to make significant cuts or come up with new revenue sources. And before we start adding in, I would ask that you listen to the whole presentation and hear where we are, because I think what you have to do, if you want to add something somewhere, you need to talk about where you want to pull it from to add it back in there, because there's no extra money in this thing.
That's a good point, Commissioner Wheeler. And so with that amount, if you want to put $30,000 or some other number at this line item, as we get through some of the rest of this stuff, you may want to think about where that money might be moved. That's a perfect segue.
Well, Commissioner Wheeler, I appreciate that, but I'll be willing to wait to hear the whole budget out and see where we go with this and where we land with this, and maybe look into where we could come up with the money to replace it. I do feel like, I want to state that I do feel like that the environmental cleanup is very important. Like Commissioner Harris said, I will echo him. And as far as the city does have an aggressive program up there to take care of the cleanup things, cases in the city. We do not have such aggressive effort, I don't think, in the county, and it's just as important in the county, if not more. And we do seem to reap benefits from it if the property values go up and we make the neighborhood safer, especially for the children in those neighborhoods, by cleaning these cases up. And I'd also like to follow up a question on what Commissioner Jones said about money being shifted to the attorney's office, I think, as far as paralegal and support help through the attorney's office to Mr. Francis' office. Can anybody elaborate on that? How that help will come about? How's that set up and how's that going to work for his office?
Well, his paralegal support, for the most part in the past, has come from paralegal out of the Sealy law firm.
Right.
So we're transitioning out of outsourcing that with the intent of bringing an additional secretarial type paralegal into legal and keeping it in-house rather than sourcing it out. We believe we'll be able to save some money doing that and provide a quality service for the good work that Bobby French does.
Okay. I have one more concern. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to submit it, but since we're talking about Mr. Francis' office, the paralegal support help he needs also, as well as the finances to do the cleanups out there. I appreciate a better effort on him getting that support, but at the same time, a big concern I have for his office, Mayor, is the fact that I think he needs in-house help as far as going out. My concern is I don't think the city sends one man out, from what I've been told. And, Bobby opens himself up to a lot of liability by going out by himself, especially in the county, because, you're going on people's property. You don't know who you're going to encounter or what you're going to encounter or what kind of attitude you're going to encounter. And you don't know what kind of legal liability might be brought against you by what someone may say or claim that you did or you said or you didn't do or you didn't say while you're out there when you're alone. I would also like to see us entertain putting somebody in that office that can go out with him, where you have a witness, you have protection, you have security, if nothing else. I think it's liable of us to not give him help in the office because of those reasons. And I'd like to see the budget consider that also.
Okay, would disagree with anything you said there. And so, that cost would be somewhere in the $40,000 range. So, in addition to the other money that you'll be looking for going through the rest of the presentation, feel free to consider that amount as well.
I understand. I appreciate that comment, and I understand money is tight in the budget, and probably don't understand fully, as the budget committee does, what we're up against. But what it could cost us in the long run to not fill a position like that could hurt us a whole lot more than adding a position like that, in my opinion.
Okay.
You ready to move on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Screen that's in front of you, and this will really go back to Commissioner Jones's question from a minute ago, about the current pandemic and how much impact that has on our finances. And what I'd submit to you is that we have a structural issue. If you look at the screen that's in front of you, in 2019, and those are actual numbers, not budgeted numbers. In FY 2019, we had a $790,000 deficit in the general fund. That is, we spent more than we collected, okay? Last year, we budgeted a deficit of $1 million, okay? This year, we are budgeting a $2.6 million deficit, which is what we're seeing are these year over year spending requests. And all respect to Mr. Edens and everybody else, I understand we're here to provide services to the community, but you have to be able to pay for those services. And as we continue to move, we don't want to see this trend on the bottom continue going forward, because it's just unsustainable, So something we'll need to look at something down the road to alleviate this trend that we seem to be in. The next slide, though, I think will help. And I do want to, a tip of the hat to all the department heads and the officials who truly worked at trying to tighten their budgets while maintaining staffing levels. There's a lot of information on this, and this is actually a 2-page slide. It doesn't all to get it all on one screen. You wouldn't be able to see any of it. But what this is it lists each department's each department is listed going down the report. The first 3 columns are the amounts that each of those departments actually return to the. I'm going to use the word return to the budget. That was their favorable variance. They spent that much less than they were budgeted to spend in that particular year. So those first 3 columns kind of give you where we are in that regard. I'll make one comment about that. And having spent years and years, dealing with budgets, I understand as well as anyone the need to have some budget flexibility. I don't think we want to have, a county where, we're rushing at the end of the year every year and having to add to everybody's budget because they've spent more than, or they need more than they were allotted to do their mission. But at the same time, when you build in those surpluses within your own department, you're preventing a $35,000 cleanup, or you're preventing some other service from being provided to the citizens. So it's a balancing act.
Rich, flip to that second sheet and just look at those bottom lines real quick.
Wrong way. Yeah, actually 3 pages. Sorry, there's a lot of departments. Okay. For example, in 2017, our actual expenditures were under budget in the whole general fund by $3.3 million. Now, keep in mind, we're looking at a $40 million budget. So, it's less than 10%, but it's more than 5%. In the next year, in 2018, we're 3.4. In 2019, last year, and, as I said, we actually ended up with a deficit spend in 2019 still, but we put $2.5 million back, if you will, or didn't spend. Had we spent it, our deficit would have been significantly more. So that's a good thing. And then what you've got is the 2020 budget. I've got this thing that's in my way.
When you look at this on a countywide basis, they really are big numbers that really underspend.
Correct. Then you've got the 2020 budget. You've got what each of the departments initially requested in 2021. This column, which I will say that this request column did not include a 2% salary increase for employees, because that was the direction that was provided to all the officials and department heads is, submit your budget, but do not, don't budget any additional revenues, any additional salary expense. The proposed budget is does include that 2%. So it essentially took the officials' request, added the 2% to it. There were some downward adjustments. And then what you have is a change. Then you have the next column. Okay, the next column is what the officials actually reduced. I'm sorry, the proposed column, I've got a bar at the top of my screen and I can't see the heading. Where it says proposed, that's where we are today. That's after the commission, after the officials have reduced their line items. And so you can see down here, they've pulled $1 million out of their initial request, which is a good thing. And then where the 2021 budget is today. And then because we've had some other weeks, and then our comparison between FY20 and FY21. So you can see we've reduced operational expenses by, on the magnitude of about 65,000 from our budget, from our FY20 budget. So, we can back up and look at these or move on. But like I said, I'll send you this. And actually, this should have been in some of the hundreds of pages that you may have received already, some of the information you've got. But this slide deck will go into a PDF, and I'll send it out before I leave the office tonight. Any questions or comments on this point?
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Harris. Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay. Well, I'll just say this. Unfortunately, down here where I live, I don't have internet capacity to watch these on Zoom, so I'm just listening on the phone. So none of the stuff that you're saying, Director Meredith, I can see. And I would just say this, we're getting ready to open back up, hopefully June the 1st. And maybe at that point we can come in and look at all these things. I mean, I was sent an email yesterday that had 200 pages, and there was no way I could print all that off from my little home thing that my wife has here off my phone on the printer. So it's, I just don't feel like it's fair to go over all these figures when you have commissioners like myself that don't have access to even see what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges that the pandemic's given us, Commissioner Harris. I did have a commissioner that reached out this morning and wanted to pick up a packet. And of course, we had that ready for him. So we certainly can do that. If as I mentioned, I didn't want anybody to print it at home, but certainly if you needed a printed copy, we are here at the courthouse ready to make that available to you or anybody else.
Is the schedule we're looking at now on the screen in our packets?
I believe it is.
I know the budget committee got it, but I wasn't sure if it was in the.
Well, and it would be in. Sherry sent a packet out yesterday as well, which was essentially your budget committee packet, Commissioner Wheeler. When I sent it,
I read this is Commissioner Harris. I read the letter she sent out, and I would just say that I think we should wait till we get back together before we go over all these details, because I don't know if maybe I'm the only one. Maybe I'm the only one that's lacking communications, but I don't get to see anything that you're printing on the board.
I think this came out under a separate email to the budget committee, not the one she forwarded to the committee.
And Chairman or Mayor or Director Meredith, whoever, if I may, and I think we're down now to about 15 minutes of scheduled time together. But kind of to Commissioner Harris's point, in my mind, what I think the budget committee may have been hoping for tonight was some direction. And in terms of direction, right now where the budget sits, rough numbers, we're 2.6, 2.7 million out of budget. We're out of balance. We've got so much revenue, and we've got $2.7 million more in budgeted expenses. I think the budget committee was hoping just for some big picture direction of how do you want us to handle this? Do we need to cut $2.7 million? And if so, we may need some insight into where we cut that. We've already heard from some about where they want to add, but we would need to know the cuts. Or do we want to work on the revenue side and increase revenue with additional fees and taxes? Or do we want to do some combination of the two? I tend to think about things in a very simple, basic format, and we either get to raise revenue, cut expenses, or some combination of the two. And I think maybe in our time left together tonight, it might be great for the budget committee, if we could just get some rough idea of what the commission's preference is in terms of those options.
And then if we could get this chart that you were going over really does need to go out to the commission, but it did come under a separate email from you, Mitch, I believe. But I'm looking at it, but it was the attachment to a separate email. And I think it would be good once we get down to the details for them to be looking at that. But that would give people like Commissioner Harris an opportunity to see that. And maybe, I think what you've shown so far shows sort of where we are. And we could probably talk about the big picture information without getting into the detail.
Mr. Wheeler, are you referencing what's on the screen now, or the one
you had on the screen that shows each department and what the unexpended amounts from those years and the reductions for this year? Yeah, that what's on there now.
Yeah, I can send that out as a separate PDF.
I think that would be helpful to them to see sort of how hard the departments have worked and and how much we still have to go to get down to the levels that Commissioner Malone's talking about.
It's Commissioner Susie. Can I say something? Hello?
Yes, Commissioner Williams, go ahead.
Now that we've met thus far, I'd like to go back and over the next few days, jot my ideas down and send them to Mitch before next week. Rather than, is that acceptable?
I think to the mayor, to the budget committee, to yours truly, either way, it'll get some attention.
We do have another budget workshop, though, is it? Don't we? Like next week? Don't we have Tuesday? And can we, to Commissioner Harris's point, can we meet in person, or we cannot meet in person? And I mean, obviously there are challenges associated with meeting in person, but if you have a huge room and everybody can really spread out, and we can put it out by Zoom for the public so there's no additional people. I'm just brainstorming, because it is really tough to be, all looking at the same numbers at the same time. And especially when you don't have good technology and you can't see it on screen. Is that an option?
Could we use the senior citizen? They have some big rooms that we could spread out in.
We could probably use the commission chamber. It'll just require additional tables and some moving around if we just get the commission in there.
I think that's a great idea.
Let me draw back to what Commissioner Malone said. And I think we need to keep our focus on this, that we've got a trend that we just can't allow to continue. Over the last, if we take the estimate for the coming fiscal year, we're talking about almost $4.5 million in deficits over fiscal years 19, 20, and 21. That's just totally unacceptable. And I think he's right. What we need to be looking at is the big picture.
And do I recall, so do you need a recommendation today, or is this something that we can mull over and bring to the table on Tuesday?
I think really we're here tonight just to give the budget committee some of our individual thoughts as well. So when they go back to work and they sit down at the table, they can remember some of the things that we discussed here tonight. So if we're thinking about cutting this amount of money, if we want to cut so much and look for other ways or other ideas of them bringing in additional dollars or moving pennies could be also an option that was discussed here. or raising additional revenue. So, I think when we start talking about these things, just some of us weighing in on what we feel would be the way forward, or what we would support on the way forward. We can't make a motion or a group decision here tonight, do a vote or anything. So I guess we're talking more about our individual thoughts as we move forward.
I would.
Chairman, could I ask a question, Commissioner Harris?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Is there any way that we could all get together? I know that the courthouse is opening back up on June the 1st. It would be nice, like as Commissioner Jones just said, that we could all get back together, I think, and make a way that we could all work on this budget together in an open meeting. Is there a way we could make that recommendation and move forward towards that?
I'll tell you, Commissioner Harris, I'll do everything possible to get that worked out. I'll get to work on that. And I know Commissioner Wheeler, he'll help me do that, won't you, Commissioner Wheeler?
Yes, sir. I've also got a question, though. Can I go ahead?
Commissioner Harris, is that satisfactory if we go to work on that?
Yes, sir. I know you will, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate Commissioner Wheeler as well. And it'd be nice to see everybody again. So thank you.
We sure will. We'll get to work on that. Go ahead, Commissioner Wheeler.
To Commissioner Jones' point, I absolutely think that some beginning to get some direction would help us. It's sort of two fundamental directions to go here, with a lot of different ways to approach either one. But we need to. Our elected officials have worked on cuts. Quite frankly, any further cuts probably have to go into personnel. And I don't blame them for not wanting to take that step until they know whether the commission is going to anticipate further cuts or not. And I may be, there may be some departments that would not necessarily be the case with, but I think with most of them, it would be. And I think they need to get some sense of direction from the commission, and they may want to come talk to you about why, they don't feel like that's appropriate, but they don't really have much incentive to start talking about doing that, and lowering their staff morale, unless they know that we are, if we decide, tax cut, if the general consensus of this group is that, like Johnson City has said, this is not the time to be looking at a tax increase, then, we need to know that, the budget committee, but they need to know that as the elected officials working on their individual budgets too.
This is Jody. I feel, as you just said, Commissioner Wheeler, that tax increases at this time would be really a tough move with everybody struggling the way they are. And so I was thinking, since so much of our budget is personnel, and we're trying to reduce by over $2 million, we really are looking at personnel if we're thinking about cuts. And I don't know if people have creative ideas about where we find additional revenue. I would love to hear about that. But if we're talking about cuts, which is where my mind goes, and talking about personnel, I think what would be helpful for me on Tuesday would be kind of a list of options. There's a range of options, like early retirement incentives or severance options, or folks being willing to work fewer hours that are better than just laying off lots of people, or reducing folks' salaries, for example. I would love to hear from whoever can speak to it what the range of creative options are. Not that we can't tell. I'm pretty sure we can't tell departments which to use, but to help all of us think creatively about what it is we're looking at, since that's mean, that's what we have to know in order to make those recommendations.
Well, another thing too, I left out, as Commissioner Jones said, is Mayor, where do we have the discussion? Do you want to have the discussion about the fund balance policy here this evening, or do you all want to have that in the budget committee?
Well, we can talk about that, anytime. If you're talking about the general fund budget, the policy essentially says that we would maintain in the unassigned category for the general fund 4 months worth of anticipated expenditures in the next budget year. So that's where that number comes from. It's a little bit of a moving target each year as the budget changes. So just remembering from a cash flow perspective, the county government does not receive any significant revenue in the months of July, August, September, and October. So that's where that 4-month reserve came from initially for the policy that provides cash flow to pay the county's obligated bills for 4 months. So to change it, that's doable. Commission vote. I think what you have there is a policy that is conservative but not ultra conservative, and represents the way the cash flow of the county business takes place on an annual basis. So anyway, that's essentially the policy. If we change it to 3 months, then that's a significant shift, but it's potentially manageable. We're not going to run out of money in 3 months in order to pay bills. But if you just look at it from a cash flow perspective, it takes about 4 months worth of revenue before we begin to get property tax revenues in November.
Chairman Matthews, I would submit
what is
that.
Go ahead, Mitch.
If you do reduce, I mean, it's one thing to use that fund balance for a deficit in 1 year, but what do you do the next year? What do you do the year after that? Because if you don't change, as the screen in front of you shows, and this is the environment that we're in, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a 1% growth in our revenues. All right, we budgeted a 2% increase on an $18 million payroll. Okay, I've factored in a 1.5 growth rate in this slide. In 2023, you'll be under $8 million in fund balance. I mean, it's just the expenditure growth is unsustainable without additional revenues.
Yeah, and so what you create there is a budget that's not structurally balanced. Structurally balanced meaning you have revenues to cover expenses. So taking a fund balance, dipping into a fund balance here or there, using, you might do it 1 year as Mr. Meredith said, but it's not a sustainable model. And I think Commissioner Carragher pointed that out to begin with, that we're in a situation where expenses, just from an inflationary standpoint, if you don't add people, if you don't add services, if you don't do anything additional for the community from the government, you're still going to have expenses creep up. A lot of the change in our costs over the years has been a salary increase, which we've done a salary increase as long as I've been associated, since 2010. And so we believe that's the right thing to do for our number one asset, which is our people. That's why we factored it into this budget. But it comes at a cost.
Mayor, I think this is such a complicated subject. I think I'd like to wait and hold it till we can meet in person with copies in front of us. I think it's just too important an issue not to discuss in person.
Okay.
I agree. Need to be in person. This is Susie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Commissioner Williams.
And I also did I understand can we get paper copies by Monday morning?
You probably can pick them up tomorrow.
Because I study better than flipping back and forth on iPad or whatever I'm using. All right, I'll get it tomorrow.
Actually, it would be good if any commissioner who wants paper copies of some of this stuff or all of it, if you could just let us know as soon as possible, we'll get them put together.
I would also like to know.
Chairman, this is Commissioner Harris. I'd like to have a paper copy if he can. While we're on the phone, I'd like to get one.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Harris. Commissioner Edens also wants one.
Sir.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mayor, how do you want to proceed? Do we push on, or are we getting ready to adjourn?
It sounds as if Mr. Meredith, that we're getting ready to adjourn. Is there any objection to finishing when we can meet together, or Mr. Mayor, do you have any objection to doing that, or?
Not at all. It would really be much better, actually.
Yeah, if we can all get together, I think it would be better to try to do that.
I appreciate that effort, and I would also like paper copies. So in addition to learning a little bit more about what cuts to personnel would look like in the implementation phase, like what are our department's options in terms of making those cuts? I don't really know much about county government and how they could handle those cuts, and I want to have a very tangible sense of how that would impact the people that we care about, who work hard for our county. You know, the other option is raising taxes, and I don't necessarily hear that as a recommendation from anyone. I'm curious, and maybe this is something you could bring on Tuesday, if that was something that you were recommending or that we're supposed to be considering, to the tune of how much, like what would we need to, how would we need to handle that? And I would assume that a tax increase wouldn't be just to address 1 year's deficit, but it would be one that would look ahead a number of years. So like, I don't really understand all of that and would like to hear that math.
Our total personnel expense is somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 million. Remembering that 50% of our expense generally is related to public service, law enforcement, et cetera. I just would also say that the sheriff's department is understaffed in the jail. They would probably tell you they're understaffed on the road as well as they currently exist. But we will take a look and see if we can get you some information as to how many individuals across the county it would take to get to a $2 million number. We'll have that available.
Speaking of the jail, do I understand from the email that several of us received, I don't even think the whole budget committee got it, but that the numbers that are in this commission packet tonight don't reflect $400,000 of additional wages in the jail where we increase those jailers' rates of pay. Is that right?
Commissioner Wheeler, yeah, what you have in your budget package is what the sheriff's office submitted. They apparently, I don't know that they forgot or thought it was already covered, but they've apparently come back and said that they're going to need another $400,000 in the detention center to cover that $2.50 salary adjustment that you authorized.
So none of the budget documents that we've got tonight, I want to make sure the commission understands that, reflects that. So that's $400,000 more in expenditures.
That is correct.
That would be that amount fully staffed. Just for clarity.
And actually, that's a $2.50 pay rate increase. You really need to add about another 17% to that to cover the TCRS, the defined benefit plan contribution, and payroll taxes.
Mitch, or the mayor, can you answer this for me?
Commissioner Harris?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Harris.
Commissioner Wheeler brought up a good point. We approve that, and there's no doubt that those employees deserve it for what they do. But again, are we looking at such a lack of communication between agencies to get our budget together? I don't understand why that was not included in this budget when we approved that increase nearly several months ago.
That budget amendment would come from the sheriff's office. They may have assumed that their current budget could fund it. And we received that email yesterday indicating that they needed another $400,000 in FY21. So, all we do is take the budget information that the officials provide to us and put it into a form for you to consider.
Allison, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
When we start talking about these constitutional offices and cutting their staff, is there somewhere there we get caught up in letters of agreement and what we've agreed to fund and is there any warning that you can give us, sir? Cautionary role.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would caution the commission that each of these constitutional office holders does have autonomy over their personnel. Mitch, I got your screen on there, so if I look like I'm gazing into the public or the wrong place, I beg your pardon, I was distracted for a moment on that. But so to that end, I thank you. Thank you so much. So to that, I think it's important to know that you would be making recommendations to them with respect to their employment issues. And I would encourage you to work with them to have that understanding so that you could give the budget committee this valuable input. I think that addresses the general tone or tenor of the law on that. You'll recall you had a resolution in 2019 with respect to a minimum wage. Remember, there was discussion on the floor that evening. It was a recommendation. It was a policy issue that the county wanted to request that these office holders use that amount. And then with respect to those letters, remember that your constitutional office holders do sign off after the budget process. And so I think working with them on the front end is a much better way than the challenge after the budget is made. I think that addresses everything, Chairman Matherly, that you were getting at in a general sense. And I can answer specific questions. Does that address it?
Yes, that answers my question.
The Chairman, Matherly, one more thing that I would say that you're probably aware of, and I would say Commissioner Harris is as well, that the Sheriff's Department has a maintenance of effort on salaries that without the Sheriff's specific approval, statutorily, the Commission doesn't have the right to defund his salary for his deputies.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Does anyone else have any questions or comments before we adjourn?
I have one, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, did you have one?
Go ahead.
I just wanted a clarification that it sounds like everyone would like to meet in public and that the chairman and the vice chair will be working to implement that. And I just wanted to remind the rest of you that as members of the governing body, the order is still in place to allow you to participate electronically. If any of you have health concerns, special consideration where you personally are not comfortable being in a room with 14, 15 other people, and you need the county to make the accommodation for you to participate, if you'd let me know so that we can meet the standards the governor has set for us. And then we will work with the videographer to make sure that we have a process. But it will be streamed to the public, as I appreciate the intent of the commission this evening. So the governing body will be participating in person. Unless some of you would like to participate electronically, you still have that under the governor's orders. And the public will be able to attend electronically streaming on the county's website and YouTube page. Is that clarification? Is that consistent, Chairman Matherly, Commissioner
Yes.
Wheeler? Thank you so much.
All right, so just before we wrap up, we're going to build paper copies for Commissioner Edens, Harris, Williams, and Jones, and have those available tomorrow.
And get out a copy of that one schedule to everybody that only went to the budget committee.
Doing that as soon as we get off the Zoom meeting, it'll be in your email box shortly thereafter. Mayor, let's touch on the budget calendar for just 1 minute, just to remind everyone participating, video or listening. We are required to pass the budget by June 30th. You currently have June 22nd as the date that you will act on the budget as a full commission. June the 19th will be the public hearing. In order to meet those dates, we have to publish the budget by June the 9th, which means hopefully the bulk of your deliberations will be completed by June the 7th.
All right, and we're currently scheduled for a meeting on the 2nd, next Tuesday, that we have talked about already, that we think intend to do live, which would be great. And then the Budget Committee is scheduled to meet 2 days later on the 5th, in theory, to sort of finalize the work that's done on the 2nd and create this published document on the 9th. A lot to do with
Chairman, this is Commissioner Harris. Could I ask another question?
Let's go ahead, Commissioner Harris.
I'm sort of confused on these correctional officers. I know we approved that increase in their pay because we had to keep good employees. Is that increase in our pay included in this budget that we're looking at, or is it not?
They are being paid, Commissioner Harris, that increased pay amount. The sheriff's department did not submit a budget amendment to actually fund that. You have agreed to do it, so they are being paid. We don't anticipate them exceeding their budget this year. So from a budgetary standpoint, there's not a significant problem.
I just want to make sure that we have their pay has increased.
Their pay
and it's in the budget, and it's in the budget for this upcoming year.
It's not in there yet.
Why is it not in there yet?
Yeah, apparently the sheriff, they did not include it in their budget that they submitted. And now they've gone back and realized that and are needing to submit another $400,000.
Well, there again, I mean, what kind of communications are we having? I mean, Mitch, you're the budget person. Why are you not communicating with the sheriff's department to get these things in our budget? It doesn't make sense to me.
Commissioner Harris, we sent communications to all the officials in all the departments. We can't prepare their budget for them. They've submitted their budget. If they submit their budget inaccurate without an expenditure in there that they know they are going to need, then that's their responsibility. I have no way of monitoring their budget for them for things that aren't already in it.
It seems to me that you all should be working together and working things out. When we approved the increase and it was passed by the full commission, so I don't know why that's not been approved on this. But we need to get things evidently a communication gap somewhere.
Chairman Matherly, this is Chief Lightning. May I make a comment, please?
Absolutely, Chief.
When we submitted our initial budget, when we first took this to public safety for the raise for the detention officers, and that was approved, we had the money in this current fiscal year to cover that raise for the rest of this fiscal year. When we were getting ready to take this to budget committee from public safety to full commission, the COVID-19 happened and those meetings were canceled. So we did not have that opportunity to take those further, even though I've already given those raises. When we submitted the budget amount this year, we did not have that in there because we didn't feel like we could include that initially because we had not taken those through full commission. But we did communicate with the budget director and the mayor that we had forgotten to put those in and that we would like to add those.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief.
Mitch, will they be added in now? I mean, is that something we're going to go back in so we can really look at a true picture, or what are we going to do? Let's get this cleared up.
I'm trying to, it will make a significant change to your to the pages that need to be printed tomorrow. I think what I would I work at the direction of the budget committee and the mayor. I mean, whatever you all what you all want us to do, then we'll get it done.
I'll yield to the mayor then and let him get it done. Mayor?
Sir? Well, it's going to require, changing a bunch of sheets, but, I tell you what we'd probably do is at least get it in, the summary sheets. We may not get all the detailed stuff done, but, that'll, the obvious bottom line effect, it's just going to widen the gap by $400,000. So now we're not 2.6, now we're $3 million.
Would be very interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Is it appropriate that you can make a chart that we know what each department, the number of employees each department has?
We could do that. We don't do like a lot of other government municipalities. We don't do position budgeting, but we could get a rudimentary, count of the number of employees in each office, and maybe even down to the line item if we need to.
I think that would be.
Okay. I was just thinking that it just might be appropriate for us to know, say, how many employees Kathy Story has, or Rick Story, or I'm just interested in general knowledge of this before we start realizing that personnel need to be cut, if that's a fact.
We'll work on getting that together. We may only be able to give you those numbers when we meet on Tuesday. It's going to take some time to pull all that together.
There's one thing that the budget committee asked for last Thursday that we don't have. It may have slipped through the cracks, but Mitch, and when you sent us the information such as the schedule, you mentioned that you would still have to we're working on getting that together. But I think it would help if the commission could look at how much new money each department is asking for after their cuts. You remember that?
I do now, Commissioner, and yeah, you're right. That did slip away.
And that impacts the MOEs, the maintenance of efforts. If they're asking for new money, that does not, come under the maintenance of effort at this point. In other words, we can ask questions about that, and we have to decide whether we're going to agree to that new money. So I think that's important to have that figure on each department.
Okay.
And as far as the school budget goes, I believe I've read that they're to hold their own from this current fiscal year, and we don't have any say in suggestions.
What you have, Commissioner Williams, is the Board of Education has approved a budget that doesn't require any additional funding from the county. However, it does use some of their fund balance. As a commission, you are responsible for their spending, and so you do have to approve their budget. It's teed up in some of the, it's in some of the information we were going to look at tonight, but it will be in, their budgets will be in your paper copies. And the commission does have to adopt, all you can do is either accept it or reject it.
Can I ask a question about the fund balance that they're proposing to use? It was suggested to me, and this had not been my understanding of the maintenance of effort with the school system, but if I'm wrong, I want to know, and I think the commission ought to understand this too. It was suggested to me that if they use the $3 million this year, then we are required to pick that up next year, that will fall under the maintenance of effort. Is that correct?
That is not my understanding of the maintenance of effort. Now, what will happen is that if they use $3 million of fund balance this year for recurring expenditures, they're going to have that same $3 million of recurring expenditures next year.
Right.
So at some point in time, the commission will be in a position to force the school to do something different or to provide additional funding. Be Dr. Flannery on board, so he may want to address that.
I would only add that the maintenance of effort is predicated on what your maintenance of effort is right now. And no matter what the board does with their fund balance, it will not change maintenance of effort.
Okay, and I understand you all have that understanding. Because we're talking about such a large number, I would like to ask that the county attorney talk to the school board attorney and make sure that the two lawyers agree that that's the case. I think I don't want us to get down the road next year and there be some difference of opinion on that.
Certainly.
But I appreciate you all addressing that tonight.
Commissioner Wheeler, I will reach out to their lawyer tomorrow and let him know that it's a topic of, and hopefully we'll have that. As soon as I do have any comment, I'll share it with your committee in the full committee.
And I'd like to say, I think the school board's done yeoman's work to do what they've done this year, and I'm very supportive of that. But when that question got raised, I just thought we need to make sure we all understand where we are on that before we move forward.
Mayor, do you have anything before we close?
Yes, sir, I'm good. I have 4 paper copies for tomorrow, and we'll have those available. Anybody else that? Okay.
All right. Any questions before we close? All right. Well, we do not have to adjourn since this is a workshop. So, but for good,
thank you all.
But for good cause, we can.
Everybody.
All right, see you next
Good
week.
night. Bye.